Well, it is good to be with you again. If you are here today for the very, very, very first time, a very warm welcome. My name is Andrew. I am the pastor here at Alive Church, and it really is good to be with you. Oh, you can clap. I don't mind. I don't know why you'd clap, but it really is good to have you. If you are with us today for the first time, really, it is good. And we don't want you to rush off, because afterwards, we have some good coffee. Really, really good coffee, and we have cake. And so, if anything else, if the sermon is not good or you didn't enjoy the worship, I can guarantee you this: the cake and the coffee will be good. But I know that's not why you came, because you baked it. Oh, you're right. I can say that to Sharon because she's employed here. So, but it really is good to have everybody with us this morning. I know the children are in with us because it's school holidays. And so if there is a noisy child next to you, just swap with someone else that doesn't have a noisy child. Or just look disapprovingly at the parents for a long time. But it's good to have the kids with us this morning as well. How many of you like chocolate? Come on, we all like chocolate. Most of us. I mean, since I came in this country, I discovered, there's a hole here. I discovered Whittaker's chocolate. I also discovered the price of Whittaker's chocolate. And so I've gone back to what we know just as being Nestle and Cadbury's, the ones that we also get in South Africa. But chocolate is good. It's just really good for you. Except this morning when I put on these pants, I kind of realized, whoopsie, maybe there's been a bit too much chocolate. Before I went to hospital, everything fitted me well. And I thought I was looking good. People told me I looked anorexic, but that was fine. I liked that, though. And then someone watched my video last week and said, yo, he's got fat again. But I remember a couple of years ago, I got given an Easter egg, a beautiful Easter egg, and it was wonderful. It was one of these big, nice Easter egg bunnies. It looked solid and everything, and I loved it. And I couldn't wait for Easter Sunday. And when it came and I broke the ears off, and I thought, I am going to eat on this thing forever. But when I broke it open, it was hollow. It was like such a letdown. It was this beautiful egg, and it was empty inside. It had nothing in it. And this morning, I want to look at that, not Easter eggs, but I want to look at worship this morning. And sometimes our worship is like those Easter eggs. That's hollow. Now, look, I'm not speaking about us, but sometimes our worship can come across like that. We think it's going to look like something, and we open it up, and it's the opposite. It's empty. It's a letdown. We come into God's presence and we give Him hollow worship. And so this morning, in the next 55 minutes, I want to just share what would that look like for us to move away from a place of hollow worship and to go to the place of worship that Jesus calls you and I to. Because you know that there is a way that we're called to worship God. In fact, Jesus speaks about that. He speaks about it in the Gospel of John when he says that there is a time coming when the Father is looking for those who worship Him in spirit and in truth. There is a way in which we worship God. But in Matthew's Gospel, it says the following. Then some of the Pharisees and teachers of the law came to Jesus from Jerusalem, and they asked Him, "Why do your disciples break the traditions of the elders? They don't wash their hands before they eat." Now, maybe I could say this. There are people that I know who do not wash their hands before they eat. No, but don't show me your hands this morning. But the Pharisees, if you know anything about them, they were obsessed with ceremonial cleansing. Everything about them was, they had to wash, they had to make sure that the outside appearance of them looked good. It was just, whatever they did, they made sure they looked good. In fact, they would go so far that they would have this ritual that they would do. The amount of water they would take was called about half a log. It was maybe 1.5 eggs worth of water. And what they would do is they would take their hands, and they would hold them like this, and they would let the water drip down, and the water would run down their hands. I mean, it's not enough to clean. They would rub it together, that water would run down, and now suddenly they would become clean. In fact, they would wash their hands before meals. In fact, they'd even wash them between courses that they were going to have. And so between each course, they would wash their hands so that they would be clean. They were obsessed with cleanliness. That if something happened to them, if they happened to see a little mouse running around their house and that mouse touched them, well, they were unclean. And they had to do a whole ritual to become clean. And so suddenly these exact same Pharisees are coming to Jesus, and they're speaking to him and saying to him, how is it then that your followers, your disciples who are Jewish, suddenly don't have to follow these rules? How is it that they don't need to wash their hands like everybody else? Jesus then begins to respond, and he says this, you hypocrites, Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you. These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They worship me in vain. I don't know if I'd ever want Jesus to say that to me. I don't know if I would ever want Jesus to come to a place in my life where he said to me, you come into my presence, you lift up your voice in worship to me, but your heart is far from me. You worship me in vain. I never want to be in that place in my life where that if Jesus had to walk into this room, he'd say to me that your worship is in vain. What about you this morning? What about you? Now, next week, I'm giving you a little bit of a preview. We're going to look at different styles of worship. This morning, I want to look at our hearts and how we prepare our hearts to get to a place where we get to those different styles and all that. Because, the English language sometimes is quite scary. We only have certain words that mean certain things, but in Greek and in Hebrew, those words have got many different meanings. And so next week, we're going to break it all down, and we're going to look at what that looks like for us, and we're going to do some exercise. Maybe I shouldn't say that. We're not going to do any exercises. So come along to church next week. It's going to be lots and lots and lots and lots of fun next week. So you want to make sure you are here. Well, what about this morning? What about our hearts? What are our hearts like this morning? You see, I think sometimes we get so confused with worship. We think it's a style. We think it's the environment. That if the environment is reverent, if the environment is quiet, then that's great. If the environment is rowdy and we're jumping up and down and we're turning around and we're doing all things, then that is worship. Then we're getting it right. We think that there's a certain song selection. If we sing certain songs, maybe once upon a time we sang a song like Shout to the Lord, and that did something to you. And so every time we sing Shout to the Lord, you just enter into God's presence. And because we don't sing that anymore, you never worship anymore. Or maybe it goes even further back than that. There was a time when we used to sing Blessed Assurance. Now we don't sing that anymore. And I just can't enter into God's presence. There was a church I used to minister at, and I would go there every month to go and preach at, and I'd have to send the hymns because I was in one of those churches, and I'd send the hymns through, and I would list all these different hymns that I'd want, and I'd get there, and the organist could play any hymn I sent her, as long as it was to the tune of Blessed Assurance. So we sang all kinds of things, how great thou art to bless. You know what it's like when you see the lyrics, and you're about to sing, and she starts playing a completely different tune. I was the only one out, everybody. But we have these ideas. We think that worship is a style and some kind of way in which we need to, if it's loud or whatever the case is. So often people will walk out of church and they say, I just didn't get worship this morning. It wasn't really good this morning. And someone once said, well, I'm glad because we weren't worshiping you. We weren't worshiping you this morning. When we worship, we take our eyes off ourselves and we place them on the Creator of everything that is around us. And so worship isn't about a style of music. I want to say to you this morning, worship is about the condition of your heart. Worship isn't about a style of music. It's about the condition of your heart. Now, that first song we sang this morning, Praise, I mean, there's just something about that song. I mean, you want to grab your partner by their hand and you want to kind of do all that kind of stuff. But I know that's not in every one of us. And if we expected that from everybody, could you just imagine when we brought visitors to church and we sang songs like that and everybody was doing all these kind of movements? I wouldn't come back. It's already freaky when we don't, he lifted me up, he turned me around, he placed my feet on solid ground. And so it's never ever about the style. It's about the condition of your heart. And so the song can be as rowdy and as reverent. It's not about that. So am I connecting with my Creator in the midst of all of this? Christianity is not a hobby. It's not an interest. It's not a part of our lives. Christ is life to us. And so again, worship isn't limited to the songs we sing. It's the life that you and I live. I'll say that again to you, that worship isn't limited to the songs we sing. It's the life that we live. So, how do we express our worship to God? How do we go about expressing it? And I'm so glad you asked that this morning. And I have about 6 ways in which we did that. And I want to share a couple of those with you this morning. But there are different ways in which we can express our worship. Sometimes we bow in reverence to God. Yesterday, my dad and I watched a movie. I don't recommend it. It's called War. It was about all these Japanese triads. But have you ever seen the Japanese people, whenever they greet one another? They bow to greet one another in reverence. How? They say. Now, when you and I sometimes in our worship, we bow. Have you ever noticed when people come into the presence of a king, now especially King Charles, they don't go, hey, Charlie boy. They walk in and they bow in his presence. We bow not before a human king, but before the King of Kings. And so sometimes in our worship, we can bow. It's an attitude. It's an attitude of saying, hang on, that you are greater, you are worthy, and so I bow. Sometimes what we do is that we lift up our hands in adoration. We lift up our hands in adoration to Him. Someone told me once when I was in school and I knew the answer, I would raise my hand. Do they still do that in schools today? I don't know. Like, do you still raise your hand or you just shout it out? I don't know. But maybe you just shout. You don't. But you're the teacher. You have all the answers. Yeah. We know who the answer is. In South Africa, you raise your hands for a completely different reason. You raise your hands in surrender. Don't shoot me. But sometimes here, I can raise my hands in surrender. Lord, I'm surrendering everything to you. Sometimes we dance in celebration. Now listen, don't kid me. All of you dance. You might not dance here, but you dance when your rugby side wins. You dance when your football side wins. You dance when you go to a wedding. You're not one of those that sit on the side and watch everybody else. No, you dance. If you're a South African, well, you two-step. There's a special dance that we've got. Every time we went to varsity, you would go watch them. You could see they would just, the Afrikaans people, sorry, can I say this? Yes, they would dance around the square of the building like this. You know, like, and you grabbed your partner and you danced like this. And all the English people, they would stand in the middle of them and like loose dance. Who had more fun? The people going around the outside, swinging each other around. Because you dance in celebration. Now, the next song, we're going to do that. I'm joking. We're not going to dance in celebration. But listen, Psalm 149 says the following: let them praise his name with dancing. Let him praise his name with dancing. Ever received a new iPhone? Ever given an iPhone to a teenager, their first one? They dance in celebration. ask a date out and she says yes, you dance in celebration. You definitely do. You do. And yet somehow we find when we come here that we need to be reserved and quiet and hold it back. I never want this place to be a place where you feel that you cannot be yourself. I never wanted to be that. I never want you to walk out of here on a Sunday morning and saying, you know what, I had to hold back a little bit this morning, because then that isn't worshiping in spirit and in truth. I want you to be able to lift up holy hands and surrender. I want you to be able to feel that you're able to bow, to kneel, to do whatever it is that you want to do. I know sometimes it isn't practical to kneel where you're standing or sitting, but we have big space in the front here where you can come. David, the writer of most of the Psalms, said, you turned my weeping into dancing. David had reason for that. David understood what it was like. David knew that after all that he'd been through, after all that he'd experienced, after he'd been called out by Nathan for having Uriah killed, David could still turn around saying, Lord, you turned my weeping into dancing. Maybe you're here today, and that's where you're at. Maybe you're like David. Maybe you think you have no reason to dance. You have no reason to kind of lift up your hands. Listen, it's in spite of our circumstances that we engage with God. Sometimes we lift up our worship as a sacrifice of praise. And that's what it means. Sometimes I come into His presence and I have no desire to lift up my hands in worship. Sometimes I come into His presence and I don't want to sing songs. Sometimes I come here and the last place I want to be is here. But I know it's the best place I can be. And so despite my circumstances, despite what I'm going through, I'm going to take my eyes off my current situation. I'm going to place them upon Him who can do all things, and I'm going to trust Him. And let me tell you this, church, when I do that, it becomes easier. I lift up a sacrifice of praise. Through Jesus, therefore, let us continually offer to God a sacrifice of praise, the writer in Hebrews tells us. Through Jesus, let us continually offer us a sacrifice of praise. The problem with you and I being that sacrifice is that we lay ourselves down, but we never stay there. We never sacrifice ourselves completely. We maybe sacrifice ourselves on a Sunday morning when it's great and there's people around us, but Monday's coming. And when Monday comes around, suddenly I don't feel like I can do that anymore. It's on Monday that we should be singing the songs that we experienced on Sunday. It's easy to sing today. It's tomorrow when you're at work. It's tomorrow when you're with your co-workers. It's tomorrow when your boss calls you out. It's tomorrow when your children are demon-possessed. It's tomorrow when all those other things in your life are going wrong. It's when you lift up your songs of praise to Him and your sacrifice of praise. It's a sacrifice. It costs you something to worship Him. It costs you something. Now, we can carry on in this country, and we can tell us how bad the government is, and we can tell ourselves how they're oppressing us and doing all kinds of things. But let me tell you this, you came here today out of your own free will. We don't have to lock the doors and hide and be quiet. We can still worship Him. We can still do that. The sacrifice wasn't so big to come this morning. The sacrifice was, am I going to get out of bed? That was the biggest sacrifice you made this morning to come here. And so I wonder, as the writer says, I will continually offer up a sacrifice of praise to God. Like I said, we worship Him when we feel Him. We worship Him when we don't. We worship Him when we're joyful. We worship Him when we are low. Our worship isn't based on our circumstances. Our worship is based on His character. It's based on his character. And so daily we lay down our lives as an act of worship. That's what Paul writes to the church, and he says the following: therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. Why? This is your true and proper worship. To lay down your lives. This is your true and your proper worship. So who is it then this morning that we're worshiping? Who is it this morning that as the band comes back and we're going to lift up and we're going to spend some time in worship, well, who is it then this morning that we worship? Who is it? What is he like? What has he done? And what is it that he's going to do in our lives? Well, there are a couple of things. First of all, that God is a rock. He's our redeemer and he is righteous. God is our deliverer and God is our defense. God is our strength, he is our shield, and he is our salvation. He is the bread of life. He is the living water. He is the good shepherd. He is the true vine. But more than that, he is the way, he is the truth, and he is the life. I thought I'd get a little bit more amens than that. But anyway, he is the light of the world. He's the Lamb of God. He's the Lion of Judah. Donkey. He is all powerful. He's all knowing. He's ever present. He is the Alpha. He is the Omega. He is the beginning. He is the end. That's who we worship. It's not some tiny little God who kind of maybe, if he feels like it, if he's got some time, might decide to inhabit our praises. If he's got some time, he might come and heal. No. Scripture tells us every time we gather, 2 or 3 in his presence, he is there. He is there. And so we lift up our hands in worship to him. We declare that he is good and he is great. We declare that. And maybe, just maybe, he'll reveal a part of himself to you that you've never experienced before. Because my prayer is that I never want you to come to church and leave not having encountered Jesus. Then we're the Rotary, or the Lions Club, or the Round Table. We want you to come to church here. And somehow in our worship, in the Word, at the table, to experience Jesus. That's our dream. That's our heart's cry. Because that's who he is. And so this morning you might be here. And you might have come here this morning and you've come with a whole lot of baggage. Well, I'm glad you came with that baggage. I'm glad you came with it. Because he's the baggage carrier. He does that. Maybe you came here this morning and you've prayed and you've prayed and you've prayed and you've prayed and you've asked God to set you free from something. And just when you think you've broken that habit, you do it again. He's the habit breaker. He can do that. But it quite takes a sacrifice on our part. Maybe you're here this morning and you're standing in the gap on behalf of someone else. And you're saying, Lord, we're going to spend some time in worship, Lord. I might not sing, but I'm going to cast my eyes heavenward and I'm going to stand in the gap on behalf of this person. And I'm going to ask for your healing for them and your forgiveness for them. Remember last week? I said maybe some people are here today and you need forgiveness. Maybe in our worship this morning, you want to do just that. Lord, I confess my sin to you. David said that. Lord, my sin is ever before me. It's ever before me. But I know this about you, that you are good. You are good. And I want to remind you today, he never, ever, ever, ever holds your mistakes against you. So would you this morning, would you trust the all-powerful, the all-knowing? Would you trust the ever-present one? Would you trust the one who was at the beginning, who was at the end? Would you trust him this morning to change, to work, to restore, and to renew in you what only he can do? So that you may leave here this morning not experiencing hollow worship, but experiencing worship that has touched your heart. And as you've done that, you've experienced Jesus. I'm going to ask you to stand. Great is the Lord, and he is most worthy of praise. Honor and majesty surround him. Strength and joy fill his dwelling. Give to the Lord the glory he deserves. Bring your offering and come into his presence. Worship the Lord in all his holy splendor. Tell all the nations the Lord reigns. Let the sea and everything shout his praise. Give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. His faithful love endures forever. Praise the Lord, the God of Israel, who lives for everlasting to everlasting. And all the people shouted, Amen, and praised the Lord. Let's worship him.